You're not reading this right now in the way you think you are. That might sound impossible at first, because everything inside you insists otherwise. Your eyes move across these words, your brain processes them, and you feel as if there is a clear, living now where all of this is happening. But physics tells a very different story. Not speculation, not philosophy. The result of decades of work in relativity and quantum theory pushed to their logical edge. What I'm about to say comes from that framework, and it leads to a conclusion that most people never hear stated clearly. The version of you that believes it is alive in this exact moment is already gone by the time it realizes it exists. And the version reading what comes next has no way of knowing it is already next in line. My name is Susskind, and what I want to explain is not a metaphor. It's what the equations of physics actually imply when we stop softening their meaning. The first thing that needs to be broken is your idea of now. Because in physics, especially after Einstein's work on relativity, there is no universal present moment. No single cosmic snapshot where everything in the universe is happening together in one shared instant. That idea feels obvious to us, but it turns out to be an assumption your brain makes, not a fact about reality. Experiments and technologies confirm this every day. GPS satellites have to correct for relativistic time differences. Particle accelerators rely on time dilation. Even high-energy cosmic rays behave in ways that assume time is not absolute. All of it points to the same conclusion. Simultaneity is not fixed. What you call now is not something the universe provides. It is something your brain constructs to make sense of incoming information. So when you imagine a single present moment that includes you reading this, someone across the world eating breakfast, and a star exploding in a distant galaxy, all happening together in one shared now, physics says that picture is fundamentally incorrect. There is no single slice of time that all observers agree on. Different observers moving at different speeds do not just measure time differently. They disagree on what events belong to the present itself, not slightly, radically. And this is where things start to become unsettling. Because this is not about what we can see or what light has reached us yet. This is about what counts as real at the same time. To make this concrete, imagine something extreme. A spacecraft moving past Earth at a large fraction of the speed of light, heading toward a galaxy millions of light years away. From that ship's perspective, the definition of what counts as now in that distant galaxy is not aligned with ours. It shifts dramatically. What feels like a single shared present on Earth splits apart depending on velocity. Events that you consider far in the future can be part of that ship's present. Events you consider long past can also fall into it. The disagreement is not small. It spans centuries in some cases. And once you accept that, the idea of a universal present stops holding together. If now changes depending on how you move, then now cannot be a fundamental feature of reality itself. It has to be something else entirely. And what physics suggests, when you follow that logic without stopping early, is that all of these moments, past, present, and future, must exist in a deeper structure of space-time. A structure where time is not something that flows, but something that is laid out all at once. And that is where everything we think we know about being alive begins to shift. Because if all moments exist in a single four-dimensional structure, then the idea of a flowing present starts to collapse completely. Instead of time being something that moves forward like a river carrying you along, it becomes more like a landscape fully formed, extended, and already there in its entirety. This is what leads to the idea often called the block universe. Not as a philosophical metaphor, but as a direct interpretation of relativity when you take it seriously. In this picture, past, present, and future are not categories that exist inside the universe. They are coordinates within it. Just like left and right, or up and down, they are positions in a structure that already exists as a whole. And once you see it that way, something strange follows immediately. Your present moment stops being universal. It becomes local. It is tied only to your position in space-time and your motion through it. Another observer, moving differently, slices through that same space-time in a different way, assigning a different set of events to what they call now. To understand how extreme this gets, let's go back to that spacecraft idea more carefully. Imagine an observer traveling at 90% of the speed of light. From Earth, we define a certain set of events as happening right now in a distant galaxy like Andromeda. But that moving observer does not agree with us on what right now means in that galaxy. Their slice of simultaneity is tilted compared to ours. And that tilt is not small. Depending on their direction of motion, the difference can stretch across hundreds or even thousands of years. In one direction, Events in Andromeda that we consider deep in the future are already part of their present. In the opposite direction, events we consider long in the past are still part of it. So now we are forced into a difficult conclusion. If all observers are equally valid, and no reference frame is special, then no single version of now can be more real than another. And if that is true, then we cannot say that only the present exists, because which present would we choose? Yours? Mine? The traveler's? Physics does not allow a privileged answer. The only consistent solution is that all these slices of reality exist together within spacetime, not unfolding, not appearing one after another, just there, all at once, as part of a complete four-dimensional structure. This is where intuition begins to break down, because our minds are built to experience time in one direction. We remember the past, not the future. We feel ourselves moving forward through change. But that sensation is not built into the universe itself. It is built into the way information is processed inside a brain. Your nervous system is constantly updating. It stores traces of earlier states and uses them to build what feels like continuity. That creates the impression of motion through time. But nothing in the equations of relativity requires that motion to be real in the physical sense. Instead, what exists is your entire path through spacetime, your entire world line, a continuous sequence of events stretching from birth to death, each point fixed in the structure of the universe. And this is where the idea becomes even more unsettling. Because if your world line is fully contained in spacetime, then every version of you at every moment already exists. The child, the adult, the aging self, all of them are just different coordinates along that same structure. None of them are more now than the others from the perspective of physics. What you experience as living is simply one cross-section of that structure, a slice that your consciousness occupies at this moment. But nothing in the block universe says that slice is special. It feels special only because it is the one being experienced from inside it. So the sensation of being alive right now is not evidence that only this moment exists. It is evidence that this moment is the one your brain is currently processing. And that changes the meaning of existence itself. Because if nothing is actually flowing, then what you call life is not a journey from past to future. It is a static pattern embedded in space-time, where every moment of that pattern is equally real, equally fixed, and equally permanent. And once you follow that idea far enough, it starts to raise a question that physics cannot avoid anymore. If all moments already exist, then what does it really mean for you to be here at all? That question, what it means for you to be here at all, only becomes sharper once you stop treating time as something you move through and start treating it as something you extend through. Because in the block universe picture, you are not a point that travels along a timeline. You are not something that moves from birth toward death, like a dot sliding forward. You are the entire line itself. A full four-dimensional object stretched through space-time, with every moment of your existence already embedded in it. From that perspective, the idea of being alive right now becomes less absolute. It becomes more like focusing on one frame in a complete film that already exists in its entirety. Each frame is real. Each frame is fixed. But your attention moves through them in a way that creates the feeling of motion. Your brain, however, does not experience this structure from the outside. It is part of it. It is located at a specific region of that world line, processing information at that coordinate. And at every coordinate, it generates the same internal claim, this is now. But physics does not privilege any one of those claims over another. This is where the idea becomes unsettling in a deeper way. Because if every moment along your world line is equally real, then the distinction between past, present, and future is not a distinction in existence. It is a distinction in perspective. The child you were at 5 years old is not gone in any physical sense. That state of the universe still exists at its space-time coordinates. The version of you reading this sentence a minute ago is also still there. The version of you reading this in the future already exists as well, fixed in the same structure. Nothing is being created or destroyed in the sense your intuition assumes. Instead, the entire history of you is laid out as a complete object in space-time. And this leads to something even more difficult to accept. Because if every moment of your life exists equally, then the idea that you are moving toward the future is not a property of reality. It is a property of how consciousness experiences its position along the world line. Your awareness does not jump outside the structure. It travels through it locally, experiencing one configuration at a time. That local experience produces memory, anticipation, and the feeling of flow. But the flow itself is not something that exists globally. It is something generated internally. This is also why relativity becomes so important here. Because once you accept that different observers disagree on what counts as now, you are forced to abandon any idea of a universal present moment. There is no cosmic clock synchronizing everything, no master timeline that defines what is truly happening across the universe. Instead, every observer carries their own slicing of space-time, determined by their motion. And all of those slices are equally valid. So when you say, "This is happening now," you are really saying, "This is happening along my world line at my current coordinate." Nothing more, nothing less. But here is where the implication begins to deepen further. Because if your entire world line already exists, then there is no physical sense in which your future is being created. It is already part of the structure. The decisions you will make, the events you will experience, the final moments of your life, all of it is already embedded in space-time just as fully as your past. This does not mean your experience is an illusion. It does not mean you are not making decisions. It means those decisions are part of the structure itself, just as your memories are. The feeling of choosing is real from within the system, but the outcome of that choice is not waiting to be generated. It is already located somewhere along your world line. And that brings us back to something deeply counterintuitive, the idea that nothing is ever truly happening in the global sense. There is only the structure and the local experience of that structure from within it. So when you ask what it means to be here, physics answers in a very specific way. It means you are a localized segment of a four-dimensional object, briefly experiencing one configuration of that object from the inside, while all other configurations remain equally real across space-time. And if that feels like it removes something essential from life, it is only because we are used to interpreting existence as something that unfolds. But in this picture, nothing unfolds. It already is. And you are not moving through it. And if you are part of it in that way, then the idea of continuing becomes more complicated than it first appears. Because continuation suggests motion through time, as if there is a present version of you that travels forward and leaves earlier versions behind. But in the structure we've been describing, nothing is being left behind, nothing is being overtaken. Every moment of your existence is already placed within space-time, complete and fixed. What we call continuity is something your consciousness constructs from inside that structure. It is the way one moment of brain activity is causally connected to the next. Each state carries traces of the previous one, and those traces form what you experience as memory. That chain of cause and effect creates the impression that you are moving forward through time. But from the outside description given by physics, there is no movement. There is only connection between fixed points. This is where the thermodynamic arrow of time becomes important. Because even though the laws of physics at a fundamental level do not prefer a direction of time, the large-scale behavior of matter does. Entropy increases. Systems evolve from ordered states to more disordered ones. That asymmetry is what allows memory to exist at all. You remember the past, not the future, because information flows in one direction due to entropy. Your brain stores records of earlier states but never later ones. That asymmetry is what produces the feeling of a now that moves forward. But again, that feeling is internal to the system. It does not imply that time itself is flowing. Instead, what is flowing is information through physical processes along your world line. Each moment of you is a physical configuration that contains within it a record of previous configurations. That is what creates the illusion of progression. And so, when you say, "I am here now," what you are really describing is a single cross-section of a much larger structure that already includes every other version of you. The child version, the present version, and the final version all exist as different slices of the same four-dimensional object. None of them are more fundamental than the others. None of them is the real you in a privileged sense. They are all you, just at different coordinates. This leads to a very uncomfortable implication when you consider what we usually call death. Because if every moment of your life exists within space-time, then the moment of your death is not an annihilation of existence. It is simply another coordinate along your world line, just like birth, just like any other moment. From within the system, that moment feels final. It feels like cessation. But from the space-time perspective, it is just a boundary point in a larger structure that already contains everything that comes before it. And importantly, that structure does not erase earlier segments. It does not rewrite them. It does not remove them. Your childhood is still there. Your current experience is still there. Your final moment is still there. All equally real in their own positions. So what you call life is not something that appears and disappears. It is a finite region of a larger object embedded in space-time. And your sense of being alive right now is tied only to the fact that you are located inside one of those regions, experiencing it from the inside. But here is where the interpretation becomes even more direct. Because if every moment of your life is already present in space-time, then the idea that you are approaching your future is no longer accurate. You are not approaching anything. You are already extended through it. The future is not ahead of you in a physical sense. It is simply another part of your structure that you have not yet experienced from the inside perspective. And that difference between existing and being experienced is where consciousness comes in. Your awareness does not span your entire world line at once. It moves locally along it, one moment at a time, generating the feeling that only one slice is real. That limitation is what creates the sensation of being a single, continuous self moving through time. But in the full physical description, there is no single moving self. There is only the entire pattern. And that pattern includes every version of you, equally real, equally fixed, equally permanent in space-time. Which means the question is no longer whether you are moving through time. The question becomes why it feels like you are, when nothing in the underlying structure actually moves at all. That question, why it feels like time is moving when nothing fundamental is moving at all, goes straight to the boundary between physics and perception. Because the uncomfortable truth is that physics does not generate the feeling of flow. Physics only describes relations between events in space-time, how one state leads to another, how one configuration is connected to the next along a world line. It gives you a static structure of relationships, not a dynamic, moving present. So, where does the motion come from? It comes from the way information is processed inside a physical system like your brain. Your brain is not observing the whole structure of space-time. It is embedded inside it, updating one state after another. Each new state contains records of previous states but not future ones. That asymmetry is crucial. It is what allows a sense of sequence to emerge at all. You don't experience your entire life at once because your nervous system is built to process information locally, step by step. Each moment integrates input from the immediate past, builds a model of reality, and projects expectations forward. Then it updates again. And again. That loop of updating is what creates the illusion of motion through time. But from the outside perspective of physics, nothing is looping in a global sense. All of those brain states, every version of you experiencing now, already exist as fixed points along your world line. The sequence is only a sequence from the inside. From the outside, it is a complete structure. This is where the thermodynamic arrow of time becomes essential again, because without entropy increasing, none of this would work. Memory would not form. Records of earlier states would not persist. The brain would not be able to distinguish past from future. Entropy is what makes the past special. It is why information about earlier configurations survives in a stable way, while information about future configurations does not. That asymmetry is what your sense of time is built on. But again, that asymmetry is physical, not metaphysical. It does not imply that the past exists less, or that the future is not real yet. It only describes how information behaves within the structure. And that brings us back to the block universe picture, where every moment is equally real. In that picture, your entire life is already present as a complete object. Every thought you will ever have is already located somewhere along your world line. Every decision, every memory, every experience is embedded in the structure of space-time. There is no point where your life comes into existence from nothing. There is no point where it disappears into nothing. There is only the full geometry of your existence, extended across time. What you call now is simply the location where your consciousness intersects that structure. And that intersection feels special, because it is the only part you have access to from the inside. But physics does not recognize that privilege. Every other intersection, childhood, adulthood, final moments, has the same ontological status. They are all equally real slices of the same object. This leads to something deeply counterintuitive. The idea that change is not something happening to the universe as a whole. Change is a relationship between different regions of a static structure. One state is connected to another. One configuration leads to the next, but the entire sequence is already there. So when you say, I am changing, what physics describes instead is This region of spacetime is related to that region by physical law. The feeling of change emerges when a localized system experiences those relationships in sequence, but nothing is actually being updated at the level of the universe itself. And this is where the idea of personal identity begins to stretch. Because if every moment of your life is just a slice of a larger structure, then the you that feels continuous is not a single object moving through time. It is a series of connected states, each one giving rise to the next, each one containing a memory of the previous. There is no extra entity behind those states, no hidden observer outside the sequence, just the sequence itself. And yet, from the inside, it feels undeniably like there is someone experiencing it all. That is the paradox. Physics gives you a complete static structure. Experience gives you motion through it. And neither description is wrong. They are simply operating at different levels of explanation. One describes what exists. The other describes how it feels to be a localized part of what exists. And when you hold both of those ideas at once, the question of being alive right now stops being about a special moment in time. That brings us to the final and most difficult step of this idea, because once you accept that the universe is a complete space-time structure, the question of life stops being about duration and starts being about definition. If every moment of your existence already exists within that structure, then life is not something that begins and ends in the way we usually imagine. It is not a temporary flame that appears, burns, and disappears into nothing. It is a finite region of space-time with a specific shape, a specific pattern of physical processes unfolding across coordinates. Birth is simply one boundary of that region. Death is the other. But between those boundaries lies the full structure of what you are. And crucially, nothing about that structure requires it to be active in a global sense. It does not need to be unfolding for it to be real. It is real in the same way a complete geometric object is real, fully specified, fully present, independent of whether anything is moving through it. What we call consciousness, then, is not something hovering above this structure. It is what it feels like from inside one of its slices. Each point along your world line corresponds to a physical brain state. Each brain state produces the experience of being now, because that is how information processing works at that location. There is no central version of you overseeing the whole thing, no master observer outside space-time, only local perspectives embedded within it. And each of those perspectives is equally valid within its own coordinates.